It was a night like any other, quiet and unremarkable. The kind of night where the only sounds are the distant hum of traffic and the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. But that fragile peace was about to be shattered. A simple knock on the door, a mundane event in any other circumstance, would become the first note in a symphony of terror. It was a knock that signaled the arrival of a stranger, a man who would stand on the porch and refuse to leave, transforming an ordinary doorstep into the stage for a waking nightmare, all captured in chilling, real-time detail by a ring door camera. This is the story of the man who knocked and never left the porch. A true crime mystery that begins with a digital chime and unravels into a terrifying standoff, leaving a family imprisoned in their own home. Who is this man, a dark silhouette against the porch light? What brought him to this specific house, on this specific night? And what were the chilling words he whispered into the darkness when he believed no one could hear? Tonight, the digital eye of a doorbell camera becomes our witness to a descent into fear. Welcome to Midnight Confessions. In this episode, we will meticulously break down the haunting footage that captured every moment of this ordeal. We'll reconstruct the timeline of events, from the first unexpected knock to the final, desperate call to the police. We will follow the intricate investigation as detectives raced against time to understand the man's motives. And finally, we will reveal the disturbing and tragic truth that the police uncovered, a truth that answers some questions but leaves others lingering in the shadows of that quiet suburban street. Our story begins on a cool autumn evening in a peaceful, tree-lined neighborhood in suburban Ohio. For the Thompson family, Mark, Sarah, and their two young children, it was a typical Tuesday. The kids were asleep upstairs, their dreams undisturbed. Mark was dozing on the couch, the television murmuring softly in the background. Sarah was in the kitchen, tidying up before heading to bed. It was a scene of domestic tranquility, a snapshot of a life built on routine and safety. At precisely 11:17 p.m., that sense of safety was pierced by a notification on Sarah's phone, a chime from their Ring doorbell app. She glanced at the screen, expecting to see a late-night delivery or perhaps a neighborhood cat tripping the motion sensor. Instead, her blood ran cold. Staring back at her from the phone screen was the live feed of a man. He stood motionless on their porch, his face obscured by the shadows cast by the single, weak porch light. He wasn't a delivery driver. He wasn't a neighbor. His clothes were disheveled, and his posture was unnervingly still. He just stood there, his gaze fixed on the front door, as if waiting for an invitation that would never come. Sarah's heart began to pound in her chest. She nudged Mark awake, her voice a hushed whisper, her finger pointing shakily at the phone screen. Mark, still groggy, sat up, his eyes widening as he took in the image of the stranger standing just feet from their front door. A moment later, the silence was broken. A firm, deliberate knock echoed through the house. It wasn't frantic or aggressive, but calm and measured, which was somehow even more terrifying. The sound jolted the Thompsons into a state of high alert. Their home, their sanctuary, suddenly felt fragile and exposed. They were trapped inside, watching a potential threat on a screen, separated by only a few inches of wooden glass. Mark crept to the front window, peering cautiously through a sliver in the blinds. The man was still there, a statue carved from the night. His face was now partially illuminated, revealing a gaunt, hollow-eyed expression. He looked to be in his late 40s, but his eyes held a weariness that seemed much older. He didn't look angry or menacing, but lost, confused, and profoundly out of place. This strange demeanor did nothing to calm their nerves. It only deepened the mystery and heightened their fear. Through the Ring's two-way audio feature, Sarah's voice, trembling but firm, crackled out into the night. "Can I help you?" she asked, the words feeling inadequate for the sheer strangeness of the situation. The man on the porch didn't flinch. He didn't respond. He simply continued to stare at the door, as if her voice was just another sound in the night, insignificant and unheard. She repeated the question, louder this time. "Hello. Who are you? You're at the wrong house." Silence. The man remained a silent sentinel, his presence a heavy weight on the quiet street. The minutes began to stretch, each one feeling like an hour. The Thompsons watched the live feed, their own home transformed into a found-footage horror film. They saw him rock back and forth on his heels, a subtle, rhythmic motion that was deeply unsettling. He was waiting. But for what? The uncertainty was a form of psychological torture. Then, he began to speak. It wasn't to them. He turned his head slightly away from the camera, as if addressing an unseen companion in the darkness of the yard. His voice was a low, raspy whisper, almost inaudible. The Ring's microphone struggled to capture the words, but fragments came through, distorted and chilling. "Not the right place. She said it was here." The disjointed phrases made no sense, but they painted a picture of a man in the grip of a powerful delusion. Sarah and Mark exchanged terrified glances. Who was she? What was supposed to be here? The man's whispered monologue continued, a stream of consciousness narrative of confusion and distress. He mentioned names they didn't recognize and places that meant nothing to them. He seemed to be arguing with himself, his whispers growing more agitated. It was clear this was not a prank or a simple mistake. This was something far more complex and dangerous. After nearly 15 minutes of this agonizing vigil, Mark knew they could wait no longer. The man was not leaving. His behavior was becoming more erratic. With shaking hands, Mark dialed 911. He spoke in a hushed, urgent tone, explaining the situation to the dispatcher, his eyes never leaving the phone screen that showed the man, their unwelcome guest, still occupying their porch. He relayed every detail, from the man's appearance to his whispered, nonsensical words. The dispatcher assured them that officers were on their way, but the wait felt eternal. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside, sent a fresh wave of panic through them. They were prisoners in their own home, their only connection to the outside world a digital feed and a phone line. They moved their sleeping children into their own bedroom, barricading the door with a dresser, a desperate act to create one more barrier between their family and the unknown threat outside. As they waited, they continued to watch the man on the Ring camera. He started to pace, a tight, three-step pattern from the door to the edge of the porch and back. He wrung his hands, his knuckles white in the grainy night vision of the camera. The whispers stopped. Now, he was completely silent again, his agitation manifesting physically. He was a coiled spring, and the Thompsons feared what would happen when that tension finally snapped. The feed captured a new sound, the distant wail of sirens. The sound grew steadily closer, a beacon of hope cutting through the night. On the screen, the man's head snapped up. He stopped pacing and stood perfectly still, listening. He turned his head, looking down the dark street in the direction of the approaching police cars. His posture changed. The agitation seemed to drain away, replaced by a strange sense of resignation. As the first police car pulled up, its flashing blue and red lights washing over the porch, the man did something completely unexpected. He didn't run. He didn't become aggressive. He slowly, deliberately, sat down on the top step of the porch, crossed his legs, and placed his hands on his knees. He looked like a man who had been waiting for a bus that had finally arrived. He watched calmly as two officers got out of their vehicle, their hands cautiously near their holsters. The officers approached the porch, their flashlights cutting bright beams through the darkness. "Sir, please stand up and keep your hands where I can see them," one officer commanded. The man complied without a word of protest. He stood up slowly, turned around, and placed his hands behind his back. The standoff that had held the Thompson family hostage for what felt like a lifetime was over in a matter of seconds, with a quiet and surreal sense of anticlimax. The police questioned the man, whose name they learned was David. But his answers were incoherent. He spoke of a promise, a meeting, and a woman named Eleanor who had told him to wait at this house. He insisted he was in the right place, that the family inside were squatters in his house. He was detached from reality, his mind a labyrinth of fractured thoughts and delusions. The officers quickly realized they were not dealing with a criminal, but with a man in the midst of a severe mental health crisis. The investigation that followed pieced together a story that was not one of malice, but of profound tragedy. David, police discovered, was a 48-year-old widower. His wife, Eleanor, had passed away from cancer 2 years prior. The house where the Thompsons now lived had been David and Eleanor's first home, a place they had lived in over 20 years ago, long before the current neighborhood was even fully developed. They had sold it and moved away, but in his grief, David's mind had begun to unravel. He suffered from a severe form of schizoaffective disorder, compounded by the trauma of his wife's death. In his broken reality, Eleanor was not gone. She was waiting for him. She had spoken to him, telling him to return to their first home, their special place, and she would meet him there. His mind had erased the intervening 20 years, the new family, the new life that had grown in the place he once called home. The whispers the Ring camera had captured were his one-sided conversations with the memory of his beloved wife. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a home invader. David was a man drowning in grief, lost in a sea of memories and delusions. The house was not just a random target. It was an anchor to a past he desperately wanted to reclaim. His quiet, persistent waiting on the porch was not an act of intimidation, but a lonely, heartbreaking vigil for a woman who would never arrive. He wasn't a threat to the Thompsons in the way they had feared, but his unpredictable state made the situation undeniably dangerous. The Thompsons were deeply shaken by the revelation. Their terror gave way to a complex mixture of relief, pity, and a lingering sense of unease. They had been at the epicenter of another family's tragedy, an unwilling audience to the final act of a man's mental collapse. The footage from their Ring camera, which had felt like evidence of a crime, was now a digital artifact of human suffering, a testament to the devastating power of grief and mental illness. David was not charged with a crime. He was placed in a psychiatric facility where he could receive the help he so desperately needed. His story serves as a stark reminder that the world is not always as it seems. The line between a perceived threat and a person in crisis can be razor-thin, and often, what appears to be malice is, in fact, a cry for help that we are not equipped to understand. The digital age has armed us with tools like doorbell cameras, turning our homes into fortresses with electronic eyes. They provide us with a sense of security, a way to monitor the world from the safety of our living rooms. We watch for package thieves and suspicious characters, our narratives already written. We see a stranger in the night and immediately cast them as the villain in our own personal horror movie. But this case, the story of the man who knocked, challenges that narrative. It forces us to look beyond the grainy, night vision image and consider the human story behind it. The camera captured the what, but it couldn't capture the why. It showed a threat, but it hid the tragedy. It revealed a man on a porch, but it couldn't show the ghost of the woman he was waiting for. The moral of this story is not about the failure of technology, but about the limits of our own perception. Our fears, while valid, can sometimes blind us to a more complicated and painful truth. It's a lesson in empathy, a call to remember the humanity that exists even in our most terrifying moments. Sometimes, the monster at the door is not a monster at all, but a person who is lost, broken, and desperately searching for a way back home. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Midnight Confessions. If you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, please know that help is available. Reach out to a professional, talk to a friend, or call a helpline. You are not alone. Join us next time as we explore another story hidden in the shadows. Subscribe now, and don't forget to turn on your notifications. You won't want to miss what we uncover next.